The small, quaint store on the corner of Elm and Oak Street had been in the heart of the community for decades. The sign above the door read Miller's General Goods, but to anyone who stepped inside, it was more than just a store. It was a place where everyone knew your name, your favorite snacks, and even the stories you'd shared about your day. But behind the counter, Mr. Miller, the owner, was a man who had a reputation for being difficult. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when the first encounter that would change everything took place. Lila, a young woman in her late 20s, walked into the store, her eyes scanning the shelves for some last-minute ingredients to make her mother's famous apple pie. Lila was new to the area, having just moved from a larger city in search of a quieter, simpler life. With her warm smile and casual manner, she was an easy person to like. But as soon as she approached the counter, Mr. Miller's cold eyes met hers. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice hard and distant. Lila noticed the way he looked at her, a quick glance from head to toe. She had felt it before, judgments made about her based on her appearance, her clothes, maybe even the color of her skin. But she tried to ignore it, focusing on the task at hand. "I just need a few things for a pie," she said, smiling politely. But Mr. Miller didn't smile back. Instead, he crossed his arms and eyed her with an intensity that made the air seem heavier. "I'm sorry, but I don't serve people like you." Lila froze. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Was this some kind of joke? She blinked, her heart racing as confusion and anger bubbled up inside her. "I'm sorry, what do you mean by that?" "I'm sure you know what I mean," he replied, his tone cutting and dismissive. "You people your kind don't belong around here. You should leave." Her face flushed, the sting of his words cutting deep. She had heard about prejudice, of course heard about it in the news, seen it in stories, but to experience it firsthand, in such a small, intimate setting, was something she could never have imagined. Lila stood there, torn between confronting him and walking away. She chose the latter, but as she turned to leave, something in her clicked. As she stepped outside, the cool wind biting at her skin, Lila's thoughts began to swirl. Who was this man to judge her like that? What gave him the right? It wasn't just a store. It was a place that people trusted. He had no right to treat anyone that way. Lila's hand curled into a fist, but she knew she couldn't just let it go. The next day, Lila returned to the store. This time, she wasn't going to buy anything. She had a plan. Her eyes narrowed as she walked through the door, the familiar jingle of the bell above signaling her arrival. Mr. Miller was behind the counter, as expected. "Back again?" he asked, his tone just as dismissive as the day before. "I'm not here to shop," Lila said, her voice steady. "I'm here because I need you to understand something." Mr. Miller looked at her with a raised eyebrow, clearly uninterested in whatever she had to say. But Lila wasn't deterred. "You think you can judge me based on what you see? Because I'm not what you expect, right? But you don't know anything about me. Nothing about where I'm from, what I've been through, or who I really am." Mr. Miller scoffed, "What do you mean?" "It's clear as day." Lila's eyes gleamed with a sudden clarity. "Oh, I think it's time you learned the truth," she said, pulling out a piece of paper from her bag and sliding it across the counter. Mr. Miller took it hesitantly, eyes narrowing as he read. His expression shifted from arrogance to confusion, and then to shock. The paper was a legal document. A birth certificate. His hands trembled as he read the name on it, Lila Miller. You're my granddaughter?" His voice faltered, and for the first time, the mask of disdain he wore seemed to crack. Lila watched him, her heart pounding. She had known about this for years, had never wanted to believe it, but it had always been part of her family history. Her father's estranged father, the man standing before her, had disowned her mother and cut off all ties when Lila's parents had gotten together. No one had spoken of him since, but the bloodline was undeniable. "Yes," she said, her voice unwavering. "I'm your granddaughter. And I have a lot to say to you about the choices you've made, about the hatred you've let fester inside of you." Mr. Miller stood there, speechless, the weight of his prejudice pressing down on him as the room seemed to spin. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. He had been so sure of his beliefs, so convinced that people like Lila didn't belong, that he had never once stopped to think about the consequences of his actions. And now, the very thing he had turned away from his own flesh and blood was standing right in front of him, demanding answers. Lila stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. "I'm not here to make you feel guilty. I'm here because you need to understand that we're all human. We all deserve to be treated with respect, no matter where we come from, what we look like, or who we love." For a long moment, the store was silent. Mr. Miller's eyes filled with a mix of shame, guilt, and regret. And then, for the first time in years, he let out a heavy sigh and said, "I'm sorry. I've been wrong. I've spent my life wrong." The apology was unexpected, and it didn't erase the years of pain, but for Lila, it was a start. It was a sign that change was possible, that people could evolve, no matter how deeply they were rooted in their prejudices. As Lila turned to leave, she glanced back at the old man behind the counter. He was no longer the same man who had rejected her the day before. There was a spark of something different in his eyes, maybe even a flicker of redemption. The story of Lila and Mr. Miller spread through the town, not as a tale of animosity, but as one of understanding, of family, and forgiveness. It was a reminder that even in the face of the harshest prejudice, humanity could still prevail, and sometimes, the truth could change everything. And for Lila, the journey didn't end with that apology. It was only the beginning. She knew that change was a long road, but with each step, it was a road worth traveling.